Listen, have you ever done anything that you wish you could undo? 5 or 6 of you? Okay. I'm one of those people that I tend to look back over my whole life and I wish I could undo what I did, over and over again. I guess I learned by school of hard knocks sometimes, And, I was 12 years old. I remember this one distinct moment. I was 12 years old and I'm with my parents. They had the privilege to travel and speak at conferences for business conferences. And so I was with them on one trip. And as a 12-year-old, I was just getting bored at the hotel, at the convention center. And so I'm hanging out in the hotel room, and I walk into the bathroom, and I notice this case. And so I open up this case, and there's my dad's electric razor. And I'm thinking, I'm 12, I'm almost a man. So I grab it, and I start to use it on my face. And I'm like, wow, this feels actually pretty nice, I'm just... And I look in the mirror, and I don't have eyebrows anymore. It was one of those moments I wish I could undo what I had done. You know what I'm saying? And so I put the razor down, I close the case, I'm like, they'll never know. And I walk out and I go to the elevator and I go down to the lobby, and wouldn't you know, the doors open and there's my parents with some business associates. They walk into the elevator and come back up with us and hang out with us in the room. Okay, and so I'm standing in the elevator and they're looking at me and they start doing this. What's different about you? Nothing. It was one of those moments where I really wanted my eyebrows restored, but now it's just on my upper lip, so that's how it goes. The reality is we've all done things at different times in our life that we wish that we could have restored. We could undo it and have whatever went wrong, choice we made, we were hoping that it would be restored. Maybe it's a funny moment like that for you, but maybe there's some serious moments in your life where you feel like I wish I could have a do-over there. I wish I could have that restored to what it was prior to my painful choice that I made. We're continuing in the Nameless series, and the conversation I want to have is centered around Luke chapter 15, if you want to turn there. But listen, this is a familiar passage, and I'm going to take a little different spin today as we talk through this. And this nameless person is actually not a real person, but he is a main character in a story that Jesus tells. Jesus tells this story of a father who had 2 sons. He has these 2 sons, and the one son comes to the father one day and says, I want all my inheritance now. If you can please give it to me, I want to take it now. I want to go live my life. So the father, just gives him his inheritance. Now think about it in this way. He didn't just write a check in those days, all right? It was land, it was livestock, it was possibly servants, all those different things. So he hands his portion of the inheritance over him. And what do you do when you want cash quick? You sell at a discounted price. So he discounts what he owns, he gets rid of it, and then he takes it to a foreign country where he squanders his living. And he finds himself running out very quickly because a painful situation hits the land. And that's where we're going to pick up, all right? So Luke chapter 15 here, as you turn there, this is the reality of it. I want you to get this before we jump in. I don't know if you've ever done something wrong, whether it's your eyebrows or not, but the reality is when we want something to be forgiven, we believe that God can forgive us, but I think we struggle to really understand or believe, does God really restore? I think it's easy to say, yeah, I'm forgiven, but does God really restore? The reality is that when we sin, and we do something wrong, we get it, we're forgiven. But I think in the restoration process, we just decide to relinquish ourselves to we're second-class citizens. We're just used goods. I wonder if this is how this young man felt in the story. So let's go into it right here. Luke 15, verse 14. He squanders everything. This is what it says. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. Some versions say that he began to be impoverished. It didn't take long to go through everything. There are times in our lives when we find ourselves in the middle of something we didn't hope for. Every one of us has made choices and decisions that led us to a place where we're in an environment, in a situation, we didn't hope for this, which brings us to the law of unintended consequences. The law of unintended consequences. Sometimes our choices take us to a place we never thought we would go. I've been a pastor for 21 years. I know, I don't look that old. But I've been a pastor for 21 years, but 16 years ago, almost, I found myself in a place of incredible ministry. We had a ministry team. We traveled, spoke at churches and camps and all these different experiences. And it was a great season. However, my wife and I, we just had our firstborn, and she stayed home with our firstborn, and we started drifting apart. As a pastor who had been married for 5 years at this point, and as a pastor who had been in ministry for 5 years, I found myself in a position where my marriage was falling apart. It's some things I wish that could be undone. It's some things that I wish I could go back and change. I don't know about you, but I found myself, if you've ever could relate to this, I found myself in a place where I didn't want to work on the relationship anymore. I just didn't want to try anymore. I just didn't want to put in the effort. But the reality is I didn't intentionally choose to be in that place. Can you relate? And I don't believe that this young man in the story that Jesus is telling intentionally set out for this path of self-destruction. Here we are, verse 15. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. So he takes a job he would have never taken before at this moment. Verse 16, and he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. The son who once had it made, now finds himself at the end of his rope, and he has little hope. Now remember, Jesus is telling this story, and it's most likely the story of a Jewish family, all right? So he's eating pig slop. That's a low place for somebody in the Jewish culture and society. And it's an extreme picture of sin and just how far off course any one of us can go. When you get off course, you start to wrestle with these questions. These are the questions you start to ask. Who knows about my sin? We start looking around the room. Do you think they know? Who knows about my sin? If they knew my sin, how would they respond to my failure? I can't have a failing marriage because I'm a pastor, you know. I can't have problems in my marriage because I'm a professed Christian. Hello? I don't know why it's so quiet. Some of you might be sitting at home right now and you're thinking, I've been gone from church for the last 18 months. I can't go back. People are going to ask me where I've been. I ran from God this past year and surely I can't go back to the church. What will they think? See, once we get past these superficial questions, that's what they are. They're superficial because these are the questions we all start with. What does everybody else think about me? Don't you love Facebook? But these are the questions we ask. What does everybody else think? And once we wrestle past those, we actually come to the real questions. And these are the real questions we start asking. How will God respond to my sin? How will God respond to my failure? How will God respond to my self-inflicted pain? This brings us to the law of settlement. To the law of settlement. It's a compromise, a rationalization of some way to bring things to a conclusion or closure. We just want things settled. So here's what we do. Verse 17, check this out. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? See, this is where we think, okay, I'm forgiven, but I'm still a second-class citizen. And listen, this story is one of these stories we typically talk about, the wayward person who's never met Jesus, and they come to an encounter with Jesus, and God has been chasing them and all those things. But I'm telling you, I believe that we're in a season in the church where church people, Christians, find themselves in the same predicament. Okay, I know God forgives me. But restoration? I'm just a second-class citizen. I'm just used goods. And I'll tell you this, settlement will rob you of restoration. When you just want to settle and say, I'm just a second-class citizen, I'm telling you, it will rob you of full restoration. And this son is willing to settle for second class. He just is willing to say, you know what, I'll just be one of dad's employees. Verse 18, I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. Verse 19, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. Do you hear the self-loathing? This idea of I'm no longer worthy mentality? Because listen, sin produces an enormous amount of shame. And I will tell you, I believe that we're in a season like no other in the church where church people, Christians, find themselves buried in shame right now. Because you didn't do what you thought you should do. It didn't play out how you wanted it to play out. You made a poor choice and put yourself in a poor predicament, and you are wallowing in shame. And sin produces an enormous amount of it. Shame is dangerous because it keeps us from God. It holds us back. It forces us to keep hiding. Shame will rob you of restoration. Say restoration. I believe there are Christians who find themselves in this position right now. I truly believe, and as I'm telling you my story, I know I'm putting rocks in your hands. When I start telling you about my problems and my story, the reality is some of you are so afraid because of shame, you will not let God deal with the sin that you have in your life. Because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what people are going to say. You don't know how God's going to respond. Yeah, he forgives, but does he really restore? Let me give you some cultural perspective here on this story, what Jesus is telling us. The son's shame has insulted not only the father, but the village. That's the culture. This son's behavior not only would shame the father or dishonor the father and the family, but it would dishonor the village. He's dishonored the village. And on his way home, it would not have been uncommon for one or more of the elders of that community, that village, to shame him, to slap him, to even consider whipping him. And to the Christian who finds themselves settling or in shame, you think, I've insulted the church. You think you've dishonored the church, and you've definitely dishonored your testimony. When your self-induced problem is bigger than your shame and bigger than the perceived view of the village, the church, it brings us to the law of surrender. The law of surrender. It's a realization that our failure is so great, we are worthy of no consideration but to put ourselves completely at the mercy of the Father. Have you worked through all those questions about what other people think of you? Have you worked past all of those things? Have you wrestled with it? Are you tired of the grief? Are you tired of the shame? Are you tired of it so much so that you're finally had enough? You're throwing your hands up and you're willing to say, I put myself at the mercy of the Father. Verse 20, it says here, and he arose and came to his father. "16 years ago, I thought, I really believed my marriage was over. I really thought it was over. I was embarrassed as a young pastor. I was embarrassed as a Christian. I was embarrassed. I thought my marriage was toast. I thought it was over, and I finally came to this place where I stopped sitting in my shame, stopped hiding, and I said, all right, I don't know what else to do. I give this to the mercy of the Father. I give it to the mercy of the Father. And maybe today is your day where you're willing, just willing maybe, to throw yourself at the mercy of the Father. You know, in this story, the son starts the long trip home, not knowing what's ahead. And listen, he comes to town not knowing what to expect, and here's where we come in. I want to give you 5 observations about the father who restores. All right, I want to give you 5 observations. The first one is this: the father sees you where you are. The father sees you where you are. I know this sounds simple, but you've got to understand, he sees you where you are. Verse 20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. There's an implication here that day after day, the father was looking on the road, waiting for his son to come home. Anybody else get excited about that? Okay, I'll be excited for you. I don't know about you, but I know this is just a story that Jesus is telling of some nameless kid who made some mistakes, but this is an incredible moment, a revelation that the Son of God is communicating to the people in the culture, and he's telling us once again, listen, the Father is watching the road for you to come home. I don't care how long you've been a Christian. I don't care how good you think you are. I'm telling you, some of you are wallowing in so much shame because of what you've done over the last 18 months or what you did 10 years ago or what you did 5 years ago. And I'm telling you, it's time that you take the rock out of the enemy's hands and say, I'm coming to the Father. I love the implication of this part, that the Father is watching the road for his Son to return. Listen, I know restoration, it's a messy business. It's a messy business. And the Father knows that. And I love, some of you are familiar with this passage, Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While I, in all of my junk, in all of my shame, in all of my distress, and all the things I ever did to myself and the poor choices I made that I wish I could undo, he still loves me and he still sent his Son for me. And some of us Christians have this disconnect. I prayed the prayer 10 years ago, therefore I'm okay. But some of you are on the sidelines because you're so full of shame because of poor choices you made, even while you were a Christian, and you're watching and you're waiting and you're not sure you could get out on the field again because you know the enemy's got a rock in his hands and he's waiting to throw it at you. Which brings us to the second. The Father loves you where you are. Still again in verse 20, his father saw him and felt compassion. Felt compassion. What do you really think the Father feels towards you? What do you really think? Sociologists from Baylor University released the results of a study looking into America's different views of God. All right, Baylor researchers outlined the following results. Let me just give them to you here. All right, 23% out of this survey, less than 1 out of 4 believe in a benevolent God, a God who is loving, forgiving, and redemptive. 24.4% see God as a distant God. He is a cosmic force that launched the world into a spin and then just stepped away. 16% believe in a critical God, a God who has judgmental eyes just waiting for people to slip up so he can smash you with a hammer. And then 31.4%, this is 1 out of 3 in this survey, believe in an authoritarian God, a God who is angry at humanity's sins. Listen, more than 70% of Americans view God not as a benevolent or redemptive God. And I will tell you, there's just as many Christians, I would believe in those percentages, that struggle with the same thing. What do you really think God feels towards you? Based on the words of Jesus here, he feels compassion towards you even in your shame, even in your mistake, even in your wrongdoing, even in your sin. And the reality is how you view God is going to affect how you step into restoration. Number 3, the Father meets you where you are. Still in verse 20, he ran and embraced him and kissed him. Woo! This is exciting. For me, apparently. Consider this. The Father, I want you to hear this. The Father runs to his Son to get to him before the city elders could put shame on him. He's running after them so that way he can beat everyone to the punch. And some of us as Christians are afraid to talk about our choices, our painful pain points, our valley moments, because we're afraid somebody's going to have a rock in the hand. And I'm telling you, the Father is running to you to kiss you on the cheek and say, no, 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 no. They don't have a right to throw it. They don't have a right to shame you. The Father is protecting the Son by running to identify with him, taking the shame on himself. Listen, 16 years ago, when my failing marriage became public, as a pastor, as a Christian, people said I don't deserve to be a pastor anymore. People said that this mistake isn't one you can come back from. People said, I'm just second class and I'm used goods. And I think there's too many Christians that are in the church today that somebody has told you the same thing. You said yes to Jesus a long time ago, but you're sitting in shame. You're sitting in failure. And I'm telling you, there's a God who wants to reach in and say, no, that is not the truth. The Father meets you where you are. I'm so grateful that he met me where I was. Number 4, the Father restores you from where you are. At rock bottom of our marriage, I didn't feel like I loved her. She didn't feel like she loved me. We're just going through the motions. We stepped out of ministry. I hung up my pastorate for a year. We got other jobs outside the church, and we went to a counseling for a year. The best and worst thing I've ever done. But I got tired of being in a place where somebody said, you're used goods. And I had to come to the revelation that I had to put myself at the mercy of the Father. I had to come to a place to see myself the way the Father saw me. Listen, some of you maybe have been struggling over the last 18 months with your marriage. Listen, the pandemic's been hard on people. You are hanging out at home working with your spouse and you're like, can't spend this much time with you. Listen, I get it. My wife's not in this service. She'll be in the next one. But here's in all reality. It's a lot of hard work to come to a place where you are willing to push past your shame and take the rock out of the enemy's hands and come to the mercy of the Father. But you got to work at it. And what I mean by work at it is you got to step down the road and head back home. You don't have to earn it, but you got to make a journey towards the Father again. Some of you have been away from the Father so long that your marriage has fallen apart. You stopped praying for your spouse. You stopped investing in your spouse. You stopped putting time into your spouse. You stopped saying, you know what, I don't feel like I love you, but I choose to love you. Listen, it's time to reinvest. And for those of you that listen, and ever since then, I've been investing in my marriage. I ain't above not investing anymore. I have to keep investing. And so I want to give you the opportunity to invest in your marriage. Say woohoo. All right, we're going to put this up on the screen. Everybody pull out your phones right now. All right? Okay, I'm serious. Everybody pull out your phone. I'm not kidding. Stop crossing your arms. Pull out your phone. Here's why I'm asking you right now. You know why? Because I don't want anybody next to you to feel shame because they're not getting out their phone. So I can't get out my phone. No, everybody has the opportunity. We have a marriage seminar that's going to lead us into some marriage small groups. It's going to be an incredible experience. It starts on August 21st. Just scan that QR code, and we're going to send you more information about it. All right, we'd love you to check it out and consider it. There's going to be more information in the lobby next weekend, but I'm telling you, it's worth your time. And I'm telling you, the enemy right now is robbing marriages in this season in the church. It ain't just outside the church. It's in the church too. And God wants to do a work in marriages in the church again. Hello? So I hope that you'll take the time and invest in that. So we come back here to this story. The father restores you from where you are. Verse 22, but the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Because listen, I want you to get this. The father is saying to the son, in essence, I refuse to have a lesser relationship with you than what I had before. No, some of you need to let that sink in for a minute. The father is saying to the son, in essence, I refuse to have a lesser relationship with you than the one I had before. Some of you Christians have been sitting in your shame for so long, you have reluctantly accepted the position of second-class citizen, used goods. And before I move into my final point, I want to say this. You might not relate to my marriage story, but I'm telling you my marriage story because every time I talk about coming to the mercy of the Father, I take a rock out of the enemy's hands. Every time that I can talk about myself as a pastor and as a Christian who has shortcomings, I believe it inspires someone else to say, well, if he can do it, I can do it. Listen, I got junk in my life. My issues have issues. But I will tell you, I serve a God who said, it's okay, son. It's time to come home. And he put the ring on my finger, put the robe on my back, put the shoes on my feet. And although I feel, and the world makes me feel like I'm not worthy, my Father says I'm worthy. And the Father says you're worthy. You might feel like, well, I don't have a marriage problem. I'll tell you, you might have an addiction problem. Some of you are struggling and wrestling with some serious situations, and it's time that you come to the mercy of the Father once again. This isn't just about the person. This story is not just about the person who's a long way off that never said yes to Jesus. This story is about a believer, you and I, that we need to grab a hold of this and recognize that we're going to make mistakes. The enemy wants you to see yourself as a second-class citizen that has used goods. But your addiction doesn't have to keep you there. Your broken marriage doesn't have to keep you there. Your failed attempts at this or that do not have to keep you there. There's a God of grace and mercy who is welcoming you with open arms. Which brings us to one of my favorite points here, and this is final one is this. The Father celebrates our restoration. Verse 23. And bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. Woo! Listen, this isn't the God of second chances. This is the God of new beginnings. This May, by the grace of God, my wife and I have celebrated 21 years of marriage. And we make each other laugh more now than we ever have. And I'm telling you, though, we work at it. And we bring our relationship daily, weekly, monthly, yearly to the mercy of the Father. And my brokenness as a Christian and as a pastor, I hope it compels you to realize the enemy doesn't have a hold on you. Shame doesn't have a hold on you. Your past doesn't have a hold on you. It's time to open the Word. It's time to press into the presence of God again. It's time to say, God, I'll get off the sidelines. I put my shame aside and I say yes to you. I say yes to what you have for me. So all over this place, I want you to stand with me right now. We're going to step back in. We're going to step back in. I'm going to ask the prayer team to come forward, and we're going to have our prayer members up at the front. But as they come up front, I'm opening the front of this as a place, this figurative place for you to walk down the road to your Father and say, I'm here, Dad. I'm coming home. My past doesn't define me. My shame doesn't define me. I don't care how long you've been a Christian. This is your moment to respond. So I'm going to begin to pray, and we're going to go back into worship. And I want you, whether you want prayer or not, I want you to come and fill the altar as an act to say, I'm here. I'm coming forward. I'm letting Jesus do a work in me. I'm letting myself come to the mercy of the Father.